So we've been talking about emotional appeals, those things that get your reader emotionally invested in your argument. Now we're going to talk about logical appeals. So emotional appeals are nice, but they're easy to dismiss because they're just meant to play on your audience's feelings instead of appealing to reason. Logical appeals, however, are a lot more difficult to ignore. They're not as flashy and they're not as fun to write, but they're the basis of all good arguments. They do require extensive research, though, to make sure the information that you use is accurate. So these logical appeals that we're going to go through are going to make up the bulk of your persuasive letter. So here's some of the types of logical appeals that we're going to cover. Statistics, data, facts, legal appeal, quotes from experts, cause and effect, relevant comparisons, historical appeal, and also examples. We're going to start with examples. So, a lot of your controversial topics are going to involve things that include really large numbers. A lot of people have a hard time grasping large-scale issues and grasping abstract issues. So think about healthcare. Well, healthcare affects everybody. That's billions of people. So you're going to have really large numbers there. Climate change, that's also something that's kind of an abstract. It's hard to just walk around and see it with your own eyes unless you know what you're looking for. So if you can offer concrete, factual examples, you have a better chance of helping your audience see your point. Here's an example. So Dwayne is writing about climate change and writes that there were 130,000 families displaced last year by disasters caused by climate change. That number is really big, 130,000 families. A lot of people just can't, they know in theory how many that is, but they can't really grasp that and make it personalized. So because it's a really large number, Duena wants to use an example to illustrate what this looks like for one individual family. So she uses the example of a family from a small island that has to emigrate after their home is flooded. So that's more tangible for most people. Most people, she'll definitely want to include that 130,000 families were displaced, but she also needs to kind of illustrate that example, by using an example. Historical appeal. People like when actions are tried and true. We're more likely to do something if we feel like it's going to work based on past experience. So you're more likely to persuade someone to do something if it's worked before. Politicians rely on this constantly. When they're passing a law or considering a law, they use a lot of historical appeal. So here's an example. While trying to persuade the public that more troops are needed to launch an aggressive attack in a war, a general cites a time during World War II that an almost identical attack worked out well and led to victory. So again, people are much more likely to back an action if it's worked in the past and there's evidence that it's worked in the past. Cause and effect. It's also easy to persuade someone to do something if you can convince them that the effect of their action is desirable. Just be sure that the effect you discuss is realistic and likely. So, example, in his argument on going green, Juan wants to avoid scare tactics because that's an emotional appeal. He wants something logical. So instead of trying to argue that the world's going to end if we don't recycle, he instead simply states that reusing old water bottles and filling them with filtered tap water will prevent plastic washing up on beaches and harming sea life. If he kind of runs around saying, oh no, the apocalypse is coming if we don't recycle, most people are going to think, oh, okay, whatever, it's the apocalypse every day. But if he has this very realistic, like, hey, just do this one small thing, and it's going to prevent these two undesirable things. You know, if you take a trip to the beach with your family and you see a bunch of plastic washed up on the beach, that's just not nice. And then sea life. A lot of people care about animals and sea life. So if he uses this much more realistic cause and effect, he's more likely to get the action that he wants. And then relevant comparisons. If you have two comparable situations, and they have to be comparable situations, so be careful here, you can use comparison in your writing. And when we talk about faulty logic, we'll go a little into false comparisons. But if you have two comparable things, you can use it. So the example is, Stacy doesn't think adults should be forced to wear that's the wrong form of wear there. Doesn't think adults should be forced to wear seatbelts while driving because it violates their free will. In her argument, she compares seatbelt laws to motorcycle helmet laws and states that if motorcyclists can choose not to wear helmets, drivers should be able to choose not to wear seatbelts. The situations are quite similar, as are the possible results. Someone not wearing a seatbelt, someone not wearing a helmet, if they get in an accident, will likely die. So those are two pretty comparable situations. Obviously, she's going to use lots of other appeals, but this is a good appeal for her to throw in.